The shouting started on a sidewalk, not in a courtroom. A man is pressed against a wall, voices overlap. Someone screams that he's a citizen, someone else yells that he's family. Phones are out, fear is visible. No warrant explanation, no calm, just chaos unfolding in public with armed authority asserting control and people begging it to stop. This isn't happening in secret facilities or distant borders. It's unfolding in American neighborhoods where working families expect the law to act with restraint, not menace. And it's happening under a political climate shaped by Donald Trump's renewed obsession with punishment, revenge, and raw power. Moments like this raise questions that refuse to go away. Who is being targeted? On what authority? And why does this keep escalating instead of stabilizing? Before we continue, take a second to follow the channel and leave a like. If you care about what unchecked power looks like when it hits real families, that support matters. Because this scene isn't isolated. It's part of a broader pattern, one where enforcement becomes spectacle and fear replaces clarity. And it's the first evidence of that pattern comes straight from the public record.
Get the out of here! Get the out of here! He's a citizen! He's a citizen!
Why are you running? Because you saw you
He's a citizen! He's a citizen! That's my brother-in-law!
Get the away from me! You don't know what's going on, so get the back! Back up! Back the up! Back up!
That's my brother-in-law.
That confrontation didn't happen during a riot. It wasn't the aftermath of violence. It was an enforcement action spiraling out of control in plain view, with bystanders forced into the role of witnesses. And while scenes like this were spreading, something else was happening at the top of power, something quieter but far more dangerous. A new legal scheme was being floated, a claim that entire presidential actions could simply be erased with a social media post, a threat aimed directly at the foundations of lawful governance. What happens when performance replaces legitimacy? And what breaks when authority is treated like a personal weapon? Those answers didn't come from activists or rumors. They came from legal experts on the record who saw the flaw immediately. The street-level chaos didn't stay on the sidewalk. Within hours, Donald Trump shifted from public spectacle to institutional threat, insisting that entire presidential actions could be nullified retroactively, not challenged in court, not reviewed through Congress, simply erased by declaration. Pardons, orders, official acts dismissed as illegitimate because of how a pen was used. That move wasn't correction, it was escalation. Trump's fixation turned immediately toward Biden, claiming without evidence that Biden had not approved the use of an auto pen and threatening criminal consequences if Biden said otherwise. The implication was blunt. Authority doesn't flow from the office, it flows from Trump. That claim collided with the public record. Legal experts didn't hedge, they didn't speculate. They pointed to precedent stretching back decades, across parties, across administrations, where auto pen use was routine, lawful, and recognized as valid when presidential approval was given. What mattered wasn't the device, it was the decision. And that's where the pattern comes into focus. This wasn't about signatures, it was about power, about whether a sitting president or a former one can unilaterally delegitimize lawful acts after the fact, about whether fear and confusion can replace process, about whether threats of prosecution can override settled understanding. Trump's own history made the moment sharper. He has publicly acknowledged using an auto pen himself. The same mechanism, the same delegation, the same concept of approval. Yet now the tool was being reframed as criminal, selectively, against a political opponent. Legal analysis dismantled the claim quickly. There is no constitutional requirement that a pardon be physically signed by hand, no statute limiting the method, no mechanism allowing a successor to terminate documents after issuance, and critically, no credible basis for perjury when the use itself has been vetted, documented, and defended by prior administrations. Even Trump's favored framework collapsed under its own weight. The Supreme Court's expansion of presidential immunity, celebrated by Trump's allies, applies to official acts, signing pardons, authorizing documents, directing subordinates. The same shield Trump relies on would necessarily apply to Biden. which exposed the deeper implication. If Trump's claim were accepted, no presidential action would ever be final. Every worker protected by a pardon, every family relying on lawful orders, every institution stabilized by routine governance could be thrown into uncertainty by the next temper tantrum from power. For working Americans, that instability isn't theoretical. It means jobs contingent on executive action become fragile. Legal certainty turns conditional. Rights feel temporary. And enforcement, already volatile, becomes bolder when leaders broadcast that rules bend with loyalty. Some officials echoed Trump's language, others quietly stepped back. But the through line was already visible. Confrontations on the ground, paired with threats from the top, both feeding the same message that legality is whatever the strongest voice declares in the moment. And that message didn't resolve anything. It widened the gap between authority and accountability, leaving one question hanging heavier than the rest. What happens when the law is treated as optional, but enforcement is not? The collapse wasn't subtle. It was mathematical. Trump's claim demanded three things be true at once: that presidential acts can be erased after issuance, that a method used by presidents for decades suddenly becomes criminal, and that immunity he celebrates for himself disappears when it applies to someone else. Each point fails on contact with the record. Here is where the final proof enters, unfiltered and complete, from the legal experts who examined the claim and found no mechanism, no precedent, and no authority to do what Trump demanded.
All right, back to our breaking news. This new Truth Social post from President Trump saying he is terminating any document signed by former President Joe Biden with an auto pen. Now, in the post, President Trump says that the auto pen is not allowed to be used unless it's approved by the president. And he goes on to write the following, quote, Joe Biden was not involved in the auto pen process. And if he says he was, he will be brought up on charges of perjury. I want to bring in former federal prosecutor Barrett Berger. Just to start there, President Biden has defended his use of the auto pen and said that he was the one making the calls when it was used. But I guess from a legal perspective, can the president do this?
So there's good precedent for former President Biden to have used the auto pen. He was not the first president to have done so. It's been used by presidents going back for decades. And just to be clear about what kind of documents we're talking about. So one of the things we knew President Biden had used the auto pen for were a host of pardons. There was many that were granted within the last few days of administration, and reporting that the auto pen was used for some of them. There's no requirement in the Constitution that says anything about either a pardon or any other particular documents to have physically be signed by the president. In fact, that there's been language that the Office of Legal Counsel has put forth saying the important thing is that there be some way of knowing that the president approved this, but it's absolutely appropriate for a president to have directed a subordinate to sign for him or to use a document. So I think President Biden probably was on good ground simply because it's been done so long before. But even if not, I'm not exactly sure what the legal mechanism here is for undoing all of these documents that he potentially signed with an auto pen.
And it would be difficult to know, I guess, at this point, what exact documents he's talking about. But just to go along with the post that he's put out to this point, he claims that not only that President Biden did not give approval, but threatened to charge Biden with perjury if he claims otherwise. I mean, I know you say President Biden is on pretty stable legal ground as far as precedent goes for the use of an auto pen. But could President Trump or the DOJ create a perjury case, and on allegations that President Biden is lying?
Again, this would also seem very unlikely. Again, let's just remember this very Supreme Court decision that granted President Trump wide immunity for acts that were done in his official capacity. Actually, President Biden would be able to rely on that same language and saying, anything that he did in his official capacity, and one could certainly argue that signing pardons or other documents, whether he used an auto pen or not, was actually in his official capacity, but that same immunity would apply to him as well. I'm not exactly sure what perjury President Trump would be referring to, but at least the use of the auto pen, given the fact that it has been used by so many presidents in the past, it's been done so widely, it would be very hard for me to imagine a situation where this would form the basis of any kind of potential criminal liability.
That's the end of the scheme, not because of outrage, but because of structure. Authority requires process, power requires limits, and lawful acts don't evaporate because a successor is angry. Return to the sidewalk where this began. Raised voices, families pleading, enforcement spiraling in public. Those scenes exist because leaders send signals. When the signal says rules are optional, force fills the gap. When the signal says legitimacy bends to loyalty, confusion becomes policy. Democratic governance offers the competing path, boring on purpose, resilient by design. Decisions documented, authority constrained, accountability shared. It's how working families plan their lives, expecting tomorrow to resemble today because the law doesn't change on a whim. Trump's attempt failed because it had to, accepting it would place every American's security, legal and economic, at the mercy of whoever shouts last. That future was rejected not by partisan spin, but by the record itself. If you want more reporting that holds power to account, follow or subscribe, turn on notifications, share this video, and leave a comment about what accountability in leadership should look like.